Okay, so today we're going to start with JavaScript today. Okay, so last week we looked at HTML and CSS. Okay, so those aren't programming languages. HTML and CSS, those are markup languages, right? HTML, hypertext markup language. So you can't do anything with HTML or CSS besides just lay out information, right? Put some text here, put a box and an image here, make it this big, this color, this font size, etc. Right? You can't, for example, you can't calculate the tax rate of how much someone should pay. Let's say you're building a shopping cart. You can't use HTML or CSS to do work. To say, let's say, you couldn't use it to say print out a different message depending on the day or time, for example. You couldn't use HTML to authenticate a user to do a login. HTML is part of that because you would use an HTML form, which we didn't actually look at last week, but we'll get into that probably today with JavaScript. It's because forms and JavaScript and server-side scripts are very much linked, right? Without, like, using a form without any scripting is sort of pointless, unless you just want your users to fill out forms for fun or something, which that's not very fun, right? Okay, so let's start from where we left off last week, which was yeah, let's put this in here. No, this wasn't it. Where was... Because I gave you guys a... I guess I could just download it off eCentennial again. I gave you guys a folder of the example we did last week. Let me just... hang on. Where did I put it? What's that? Is that what I called it? COM229? That's not it. That's something else. Maybe I put it on the desktop. I can just download it off eCentennial again. Okay. I got it here. Okay, so we'll put it here, and let's expand. Okay, so let's have a look here. So this is our index page. Okay, so one thing I want to sort of update you on is the fact that we used... so this pattern that we did here, this header, div tag header, div tag content area, and then a div tag called footer. That's such a common pattern that with HTML5 now, we have come up with sort of custom tags that are, so instead of using div with an ID header, now we just use a tag called header. Like this, header. Okay? And the reason we do that, it's just a little more clear now, and now layouts between developers should be a little more consistent, because, you know, if we just use IDs, you might call it header, I might call it head or top or something. But now that we have a tag called header, everyone's sort of on the same page. So now let's open this up in our browser here. So now it's sort of it's messed up. So what we have to do is we have to adjust our CSS. And so now instead of header, now we can just take this away, because now it's an actual element. It's not an ID anymore. So we'll save it, and this should be better now. Okay. So it's same thing for footer as well, right? So let's change this to footer, and we'll go down to here, and we'll change this from a div tag with an ID footer. We'll actually change it to element called footer. And remember, it's just a div. It's a special case of the div tag, right? So it's the footer tag, and then it should be okay here. Okay, and then I believe I would have to double check. I think we have a content tag. Let me just double check here. I'm not sure if it's called content. Is there one? No, there isn't one called content, but we could. There is one called. There's one called section. So let's use section. Section is probably the best one to use. So instead of div ID content area, we'll just call it a section. And then, where did I have that? It was this one here. Close. Okay. And then, of course, we'd have to change it in the style sheet. So we change this to section. Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to update you guys on that. So I used the old style just to get you guys up to speed. I don't want to like sort of overwhelm you, but just remember that these are just like they're just special div tags, okay, with a special label, and that's something new that we have in HTML5. Okay. So now what we want to do is we're going to start with JavaScript. Okay. So, but before we do that, let's just have a quick reminder about what programming is. Okay. So. So we've learned HTML and CSS so far. Again, those are just markup languages. They can't do any type of work, okay? Any programming work. So I always say there are three sort of what would you call them? Maybe pillars of programming, okay? And so once you know these things, you sort of know programming. And everything else is just sort of a version of these pillars, okay? So number one, the first thing are variables, okay? So variables are places where you can store little bits of data, little like information, okay? So if you have a program and you get some input from me, then I can store that input in my program in a variable, okay? And things, you know, there are simple variables that only store, let's say, one number or even one character or one byte or one bit, okay? And then there are very complex variables like a database, okay? So that runs the full spectrum. The other thing we have are conditional statements, okay? So these make decisions. They help you, it helps your decisions. It helps your program appear intelligent, right? So, for example, when your program may or may not let a user log into the system, right? And so using conditional statements, you could say things like, if user is authenticated, grant access, else deny access. Okay? So mostly we have if and else statements to do that. There are like switch statements and things. But generally we're deciding on branches of code, which branch of code to run based on a condition. Okay? And we'll look at that in JavaScript. Like one of the first examples will be, you know, just displaying different HTML depending on, let's say, the time of day, for example. Okay? So let's just go back up to, so we have, what can we store in here? So we have, you know, little bits of data, okay, and that can be, so it can be small to large. So that could be like a single bit all the way up to a giant database, like the database that supports Facebook or something, or the database that NSA has on all of us. Okay. Single bit all the way up to database. So we have conditional statements, make decisions. And then finally, the third pillar are loops. Okay? And this is the workhorse of programming. This allows you, have you ever heard of, let's say if I want to crack into someone's bank account. Okay? One method is called brute force. Right? Brute force. That means I'm just going to make a loop, a computer loop, that's going to try every single combination. Right? So if your password is 8 characters, it's going to say, is the password 1? No. Is it 2? No. 3, 4, 5? Every combination and permutation. Okay? And eventually it'll get it. Eventually. Okay? And because computers are so fast, it makes it seem almost like they're smart, when really they're just trying. They're just dumb machines kind of trying every little thing. Okay? So that's what we can do. We can use loops to do work. Okay? And to essentially it helps us with repetitive things. Okay? And we'll look at loops today too in JavaScript. So these are the 3 pillars, and we're gonna. So this is common to all programming languages. So C++, C#, C, Java, JavaScript, which we're going to learn today, PHP, any language has these 3. Okay, and essentially there are some advanced things that we have to consider, but mostly we can fit these things in. Hi. No phones in class, guys. Okay. So let's start with the example. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some simple JavaScript into our index file. Okay, and just like with CSS, there are a couple of ways to embed JavaScript code into your index file. Okay, so one of the ways is you can include the script directly in your HTML file. Okay, right in this file here, we could put our script right here. That's one way to do it. Usually, you don't want to do it that way. Usually, so just like CSS, how you put all your CSS code in a separate file, with JavaScript, you also generally you want to do that. There are exceptions to that rule, just like pretty much all rules, but for the most part, you want to have all your JavaScript in separate files in their own folder. So you already have 2 folders in your web folder, right? You have images and you have CSS, and now you're going to have another folder called JS or JavaScript or something like that. Okay. Okay. So let's do that. Let's start off. We'll start off right, and we will put, what we'll do is we'll start off with our JavaScript in a separate file. Okay? So here's what we can do. So we can put our link into our head if we want. It doesn't have to be in the head. We can put it in the body throughout the document. And there are actually reasons why we would put it in the bottom of the document, and we'll get into that in a minute. But so, for example, the first thing we want to do is actually, let me open up Dreamweaver because that's a little bit easier. Again, you can do this in Note++ or any other IDE. Okay. So we'll open up our style sheet and our index file. Okay. Okay. So what we want to do is we're going to add in a link. Well, the first thing we'll do is we need to create a new file. So we'll go back to our folder here, and let's create a new folder called JS. And in JS, we'll create a new file called javascript.js, and we'll get rid of this text file. Okay? And we will bring this up into here. Okay? Now I wonder if we do, no, I wonder if we do this. Let's see if Dreamweaver's smart enough. No, that's not going to work. Okay, so we'll have to just type in the script by hand. So what we do is we just, in here, we type in script, and then we give it a source, and we'll give it 2 quotes, and then close the script tag right away. And then in between the quotes, we're going to give it the file name. So that is JS, that's our folder, and then our file name was javascript.js. Okay? And let's save that. So one thing we can do in JavaScript is we can create alert boxes. You know those boxes that pop up and say a message, and then you can click OK? So that's usually the first thing I do when I implement a JavaScript file is I have an alert box to make sure everything's working, just like we did last time with JavaScript. So now we'll put in hello world into here. Okay? So if I view my index page now, we should see this if all is well and good. Okay. See how we got the box there? Okay. So our JavaScript file is working now. Okay? So one other thing I'll mention a few things as I go along. So Java and JavaScript are not related at all, aside from their name. When it's just really, I think the only reason it's called JavaScript is because when it came out, sort of Java was kind of the new hot topic, and I guess maybe they thought, oh, we'll kind of call it Java too. But they're not related at all. They're different technologies. Okay. Okay, and so remember, JavaScript is a client-side script. So that means when you run JavaScript, it's running on your client machine. Okay, that's why I didn't start up my server today, because we don't need to quite yet. We could, but we don't need to. Right? I could go to localhost and things, but I could serve it off off Windows Explorer, and it's still the same thing. Okay. Okay, so let's move forward with our JavaScript. So what do we want to do with our JavaScript? So one thing we can do is we can do calculations. Okay, so let's say we'll use our alert box for now as our conduit into our script, but we'll change that in a minute. We'll get to better methods. Generally, you shouldn't use alert boxes on your web page. The only reason I use alert boxes is sometimes to debug my web page. But alert boxes are generally it's not good design because it grabs control, and they're annoying, and so generally avoid alert boxes. But we're just doing this for example purposes, but in general avoid them. So remember I said the first pillar of programming was variables. So in some languages you have to specify the type of variable. So in Java, for example, if you're going to store a number, like an int, you have to tell it what kind of number. So you're going to say, I want to store an integer, or I want to store a double, or I want to store a boolean. Okay, in JavaScript, not Java, you don't have to specify the type. Okay, we still have to declare the variable, but then afterwards we can put anything in we want. Okay, so for example, let's declare a variable called miles, for example. Okay, and we can give it a value by using the equal sign, and so now that miles is equal to 0. So now if in our alert box, if we put miles here, okay, and then we refreshed, it displays 0, right? The value, doesn't display miles. Okay, so now let's do another variable. So for example, let's do gallons. Okay, and we could make that equal 15. Okay, and then what we can do is we'll have a third variable called miles per gallon. Okay, and we will make miles per gallon equal to miles divided by gallons. Okay, and we'll set miles to be 100 and gallons 15. Okay, and then let's alert now. So we'll create we'll just put miles per gallon in our alert box here. Okay, and we'll refresh, and now see we have a calculated value. Okay, so now we've just used JavaScript to do some simple math. Okay. So one important type of variable is strings. Okay, so for example, let's have a message. So instead of just putting out a number, we should have print a nice message. So when we want to use strings, we use quotes, double quotes. So we could say the miles per gallon is semicolon. Okay, and then what we can do with variables, string variables, is we can concatenate them with other variables. So we can add them, and what it does is it puts them together. So now in our alert box, we'll say message plus miles per gallon. Oops. Okay, so let's now see how we have our message. Okay, so notice that what this does depends on the type that's on either side of it. Because if message is a number, it will add the numbers together. But if message is is string, it'll concatenate them. Okay? Okay, so that's some very basic JavaScript. Let's keep moving on here. Okay, so where do we want to jump in here? Okay, let's start with some. We can use JavaScript to get user data, and I'll show you this method just sort of now to get started. But really, you should use forms, HTML forms, and I'll show you. We'll get to forms in a little bit, and we'll look at how to use them properly. So instead of using a string literal, what we could say is or here we'll say miles equals prompt. Okay, and that's a JavaScript function, and then we'll give it a message. So enter the miles driven. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we'll say miles equals parse float. So what this will do is this will change the value into a float. Okay? And we'll say miles. So it might seem weird. I'm passing the same variable in, right? So this just is saying it's saying the new value of miles is equal to the old value, but turn it into a float. Okay? So let's try that now. So we'll refresh. So now I could say 100. Okay, and there we have. So I could put in a different value now. I could say 99, and then obviously a different value is going to come out. Okay? Okay. Again, don't use these boxes when you do your design. This is just to demo JavaScript. Okay? Okay, so that's how we can get data from the user. Okay, a couple of other things. Remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. So miles per gallon and miles per gallon, those are two different variables. Okay, and I see students get tripped up with that a lot. Always remember, so your statements, your JavaScript statements, always end in a semicolon. Okay, notice that. That's often an error, a common error as well, is forgetting to put semicolons. Okay? So remember, in programming and in general and in JavaScript, always name your variable something meaningful, right? So, I could have named this variable X. I could have, right? But that's bad. Don't name it that. I could have said MPG, but even that's a little cryptic? Why not just write out exactly what it is? So your variable name is long. Big deal. You won't just copy and paste it if you want to save typing, right? That's the big deal. But make sure you use nice, relevant variable names. Okay. So let's have a look at conditional statements. Okay, so let's have a conditional statement now. So what we need the if command. Okay, so we'll say if, and then we have our brackets. So what we put in between the brackets here, we put a conditional statement that is either true or false, and then if it's true, whatever is in the brackets runs, and if it's false, then it doesn't run. Okay, we could have an else. So if it's false, it'll do the else. Okay? So what we'll do here is we'll get rid of this for now. Or we'll keep the declaration, but we'll make it equal to null for now. So we'll say if miles per gallon, okay? And then we can use Boolean operators. So we'll say if it's greater than, let's say 10. Is that good, miles per gallon? What's good, miles per gallon? Is that 40? 40 is good, isn't it? 40 is high. If miles per gallon is greater than 40, then we'll say message equals you have good mileage. Okay? Is it 1 or 2 L's? Okay? I think it's 2 L's. So then we can finish it off with our else statement. So else, or we could have another if statement, right? We could have no, it's actually 1 L and then E. Okay. We could have ifs. So we could have if greater than 40. Then we could have another if statement like if miles per gallon is greater than 20, and so we're going to combine two statements, and miles per gallon is less than 40, and here we'll say greater than equals, so that includes 40 because we want that to include 40. Then we'll say you have okay mileage, and we'll say else if. Okay. And then down here, we'll say else, and then we'll say message, you have poor mileage. Okay? And then let's put semicolons and a space here. Okay? So now when we refresh, so we'll enter the miles driven, 200, and so I have poor mileage because it's 13. Okay? But now let's enter in another number. Let's enter in 5,000. You have good mileage because it's greater than 40. So see how we've made a decision now based on different input. Okay? Okay. So I'm not going to spend too much time on conditional statements because you should have some knowledge of that already. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is well, let's actually let's see here. I've got on this. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so we know how to do input and output with alert boxes, but now we're going to do one of those things again that you shouldn't really do, but I'm just going to show you now because I need to demonstrate other things. So what we're going to do is we're going to write to our HTML HTML document using a JavaScript method. Okay, and there's better ways to do this, and we'll get to those ways, but I'm just going to show you this initially. Okay, so instead of using the alert box, so we're going to get rid of this. What we're going to do is we're going to say document. So in JavaScript is object-oriented. How many of you have experience with object-oriented programming? A little bit? Okay. So document is an object, right? And inside the document object, see, Dreamweaver helps me. It gives me all these options, all these methods we can use. So I'm going to use a method called writeLine. Okay? And what that's going to do, that's going to write a little bit, and so let's use hello world again, just to make sure that it's working. So now we should have hello world. Actually, we might have to move the script. So actually, let's get rid of this. We'll get rid of our prompt. Okay, so where you can do comments in JavaScript with // Okay, so we'll get rid of that prompt and let's refresh. Okay, and there we have it. There's hello world. Okay, print it out. So now let's go back here. So instead of, we'll close this. Instead of hello world, now we'll cut from here and we'll paste this in here. Okay, so now it's going to say not a number because we haven't actually accepted it in from the user yet. Okay, so now we're writing to the document right now. Okay, and that's actually not the best way to do it, because if you use document writeLine or write incorrectly, you can it wrecks the structure of your page, and so there are other ways to do it, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to show you loops. So let's look at a while loop now. Okay, so this is the third pillar of programming, and so what loops allow us to do is execute a series of commands over and over and over and over again. Okay, so there are generally two types of loops. There are others, but generally there are different flavors of these two. So one is called a for loop, and one is called a while loop. Okay, a while loop, what it looks like is, it sort of looks like an if statement, but instead of if, we have while, and then in the brackets, we would have a Boolean statement, just like in an if, and we also have brackets. So anything between these brackets is going to be, that's part of the loop iteration. So as long as it's looping, the code in here is going to be run. Okay? So what we can do is we'll create a variable, and we'll call it counter, and we'll give it a value of 0. Okay? And inside our while loop, we'll say while, we want it to loop while counter is less than 10. Okay? And inside the loop, what we're going to do is we're going to say counter equals counter plus 1. So every time it loops, counter is going to be increased by 1. Okay? So now what will happen, let's try this. Let's refresh. So why do we have so many now?
It's less than 10 times.
Yeah, so it's going to iterate 10 times. And so so now we can see the power. So let's say instead of 10 times, we want to go 1,000 times. So I just put in 2 more zeros, right? And now, here we go. Okay, lots of messages. Okay? And instead of this message, let's say we could print out counter. Okay? It's printing out the value. Okay? So normally we use while loops when we're not too sure how many times we need to loop. Okay? So let's say we might want to have let's say we're trying to authenticate a user. Okay? We're not sure how many times it's going to take them to enter in the right stuff. So we might need to have a while loop, right? That keeps looping, that keeps asking them over and over again until they get it right. Okay? The other style of loop is called a for loop. And usually we use a for loop when we know how many times we want to iterate. So if we have an array with 100 items in it, we know we need to loop 100 times to access all those elements in an array. So what we would do is we would say set up a for loop. And so basically a for loop and a while loop are the same thing. It's just the for loop has syntax that's a little bit different to support this counter paradigm. Okay? So we set up our counter variable, and usually we call it I. And then, so the first statement is the counter variable. We define it. Then we say what the loop condition. So it's the condition that it will keep looping under. So let's say 100. And then the final one is what happens to I each time it loops through. So in this case, I++ means I will increase by 1. Okay? So now we can do the same thing here. We can print, instead of counter, we'll print out I. Okay? And let's comment out this. We can comment out a block of code by using */. And that, so this code is gray now, and that code won't run. So now if we go here, now we have 100 times. Okay? So those are the two loops. Those are that we'll need to use. Okay? Okay, so what I want you guys to do, we're going to take a 10-minute hands-on break. Okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to create an index file with a JavaScript script, okay, that prints out the lyrics to the song 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. Does everyone, do you guys know that song?
"86 bottles of beer on the wall, 86
Right?
ground, 82 bottles of beer on the wall."
Oh, somehow this isn't a. These guys aren't the best example for some reason. Let's just look at the lyrics. Bottles of beer on the wall, lyrics. Okay, here we go. So here it is. So right, 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer, take one down, pass around, 98 bottles of beer on the wall. And then it just repeats over and over and over again, okay? So you may not copy and paste the lyric 99 times, okay? That's not allowed. You need to use a loop, okay? Okay, so get to it. You should be able to do that in 15 minutes. I want to see this so it's 20 after, at 10:35. I want to see 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Okay? So if you have any questions, like how to get the script hooked up, I'll be floating around and I can help you guys out. Okay? So let me just oops.